Meantime, UFO sightings in New York have nearly doubled since the pandemic began, and we are getting new video from the Navy showing pyramid-shaped objects flying
out of that mysterious close encounter. This object you see here was caught on camera flying past the SpaceX rocket just minutes after liftoff last week. Transportation report.
In the language of the U.S. Department of Defense, these are unidentified aerial phenomena. Videos which add fuel to the belief of some that we are not alone.
We spent some time reporting on this story. We should have spent a lot more time, because this could be the most consequential thing to happen to this country, to this world, maybe ever. In June, the United States government is set to release a public report on everything it knows about UFOs. Blue Elizondo.
On this episode of The Soul Trap, we talk about the sons of God, or what the Pentagon terms UFOs. There is something out there, peering back at us through the veil of time and dimensions. Bible believers have known for a very, very long time that we are not alone. But now the world is beginning to catch up to the reality that the gods of Genesis 6, the gods of the stars, are soon to make their visible return. UFO sightings are no new thing. In fact, they have been around for centuries. Truth be told, they have been around for millennia, for thousands of years, and across all cultures and lands. We see them in paintings. We see them on ancient rock drawings. We hear of them in the lore and legends of the past. UFOs have been here, and now we hear of them from our own government.
Oh, that's no, is it? It's not. It is on Earth, dude. Well, if there's like anything, have a look on the
In 2015, pilots flying off the east coast of America spotted this.
Girl going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude.
Again, its speed and movement apparently astounding experienced aircrew.
That is on Earth, dude. Well, if there's like anything, it's rotating.
There were plenty of memes to go around when Donald Trump initiated the Space Force. But is it as funny now as it seemed then? If we are seeing a soft admission of UFOs, then the next logical question must be, when will we see an admission of the abduction encounter? The encounters of the fourth kind? When will we be told the truth that creeping in the shadows of our homes and the caverns of our darkest experiences, these beings that pose as extraterrestrials are in fact interdimensional intruders, spiritual beings who have been held in check for a very, very long time, but now, as the end nears, the check loosens. The UFO is an amazing study, and one of those that have been at the very front of the UFO study is a man by the name of Dr. John Mack. John Mack is a well-known and famous, if not infamous, author and alien abduction researcher. And he has written a rather well-thought-out article addressing some of the root issues when it comes to the alien abduction issue and the UFOs themselves. In the article, Mack states that the Western materialist worldview has been hugely successful in its exploration of the physical world, revealing many of its secrets and using this knowledge to serve human purposes. Mack states that we have overcome the harshness of winter, reduced suffering through advance in medicine, and learned to communicate electronically with those far away. But there is the notion that the physical laws we know describe all that is, and that if other beings reside in the cosmos, they will behave more or less like we will. The U.S. government-funded SETI program, which operates on this very assumption, made the assumption that extraterrestrial intelligence could be found simply by sending out radio waves out into the universe. This illustrates our bias. The mere possibility that advanced intelligences might not choose to communicate with us through such a tiny or limited technological aperture seeking perhaps some fuller opening of our consciousness, seems not to have occurred to the inventors of SETI. As philosopher Terence McKenna has suggested, to search expectantly for a radio signal from an extraterrestrial source is probably as cultural bound a presumption as to search the galaxy for a good Italian restaurant. Now, I think it's interesting, and we need to stop here for just a moment. And on an aside note, this is why it is very important when you come to researchers like John Keel and Jacques Vallée, that they have had such an important and profound impact on the study, because they have looked beyond the mechanical explanations, and that is the key. Although they're by no stretch of the imagination Bible believers, they see the spirit world, though they might not use spirit terminology. They have looked beyond the mechanical explanations and seen something more dimensional, and as we stated, spiritual. Mack goes on to say in his article that it is not altogether clear why we become so attached to our ways of seeing the world. Perhaps a comprehensive scientific paradigm, like any ideology, gives us a sense of mastery and power. Mystery in the sense of not knowing are antithetical to the need to maintain control, and seem at times to inspire such terror that we fear that we might blow apart. This might explain why it is the intellectual and political elite in our culture that seem most deeply wedded to perpetuating the materialistic view of reality. The UFO abduction phenomenon strikes at the heart of the Western paradigm and reveals us to be utterly without control, or one could say, not alone. It strikes at us, and it is more readily accepted to the grassroots level than by the culturally sophisticated or most intellectually advanced among us, Mack writes. For it is, to a large degree, the scientific and governmental elite and the selected media that controls and that determines what we are to believe is real. For these monoliths are the principal beneficiaries of a dominant ideology. This politics of ontology is then the primary arena in which the reality and significance of the UFO abduction phenomenon must be confronted. Mack goes on to say, before its potential meaning for our individual and collective lives can be realized, it has to be taken seriously and moved out of the sensationalized tabloids into the mainstream of society. And let me pause from his article here and add just a thought, that we are seeing the UFO issue move out of the dark and strange into the light and into acceptance. We are seeing this more and more as sightings are being reported and recorded, and of course, as mentioned earlier, we now have a Space Force. An actual branch of our military is now tasked with defending us via outer space. Dr. Mack also touches on this insight regarding government protection and the UFO issue when he states, for our own government and other governments around the world, the abduction phenomenon presents a special, unique problem. It is, after all, the business of government, or should be the business of government, to protect its people. And for officials to acknowledge that, for strange beings from radar-defying craft to, in seeming defiance of the laws of gravity, space and time itself, invade our homes and abduct our people, would indeed create a particular problem for governments. This may explain why government policy in relation to UFOs has been, from the beginning, so confusing, so murky, and in fact, quite frankly, mystical. A kind of garbled mixture of denial and cover-ups that only fuels the conspiracy theories. There are also other political implications of the abduction phenomenon. Again, it behooves us to vary away from the article for just a moment and take note that there is a huge difference here between what we're talking about in encounters. When one sees a UFO versus when one encounters a being. The encounters of the third and fourth kind are the most dangerous. Seeing and encountering UFOs, as we said, are one thing, but abduction takes this into a very black and scary world that has profound spiritual implications. Another question that we have to ask ourselves is this: Is it possible that certain elements within our government have already encountered the beings we are now speaking of? However, these beings have chosen to show themselves. That at the most highest levels there is already a plan of revelation soon to unfold before our eyes. The question that we have to ask ourselves is, are they among us? Are they breeding with us? Are the subtle exposures of these crafts and the countless cases of abductions all building toward a crescendo of the unimaginable, walking side by side with us as distant cousin extraterrestrial mentors, and yet vaguely resembling what we feel in our consciousness, reaching back to Genesis chapter 6? Are they already here? Is what we're seeing among all of these latest sightings letting us know that the end is closer than we think? John Mack, as we mentioned before, researches this out very thoughtfully and thoroughly. And he comes to some very profound root issues when it comes not only to the sighting of UFOs, but to the alien abduction themselves. Mack states that politics, local, national, international, is after all a game of power. We seek power to dominate, control, or influence a sphere of action. But the abduction phenomenon, by its demonstration that control is impossible, even absurd, and its capacity to reveal our wider identity in the universe, and that is a key statement, invites us to discover the meaning of power. Isn't that interesting? When Satan encountered Jesus in the wilderness, he offered him power. When Satan encountered Eve in the Garden of Eden, it was basically an offer of power. And we must ask ourselves that when these beings finally reveal themselves, pre-rapture or post, will they be offering to us power? Power in a deeper spiritual sense, Mack writes. The more global, even cosmically interconnected identity that is implicit in the UFO abduction phenomenon might at least offer a distraction from our struggles for ownership and dominance of the earth. It's interesting to think that the Antichrist, when he shows up, will bring peace. And when we see the world in great conflagration, when we see all of the conflict, we have to ask ourselves, will these beings from the skies first bring us the power of peace as a token, as a Trojan horse for the new world in which they intend to layer over us? At best, Mack writes, it could draw us out of ourselves into potentially infinite cosmic adventures. But all this depends on taking the phenomenon and its implications seriously. Now that's key. What Mack is saying is that there are profound implications to almost every area of life that the UFO phenomenon brings. Mack says that the UFO abduction phenomenon presents a particular problem, especially for organized religion. From the beginnings of history, groups of human beings, recognizing the power and potential peril of spiritual forces, quote unquote, out there, have taken upon themselves the task of guiding us through the ultimate matters of life, so Mack states. Religious leaders instruct us in the nature of God and determine for us what spirit beings or other entities may exist in the cosmos. Now that's very, very profound. One thing that I think Bible believers may have to face is not just the great falling away and the apostasy, but the very presence of these angels that come to us in UFOs, clothing themselves in the appearance of ancient, distant cousins from another galaxy, wiser than us, more technologically advanced than us, a new, modern Prometheus intervention that lifts us out of the morass of our political and scientific and philosophical and even medical troubles. They are here to help, and to help us politically, socially, and one thing will be spiritually. In a world where mainstream Christianity is falling apart, what will it be like when these quote-unquote angels show up? They will show up, of course, to truly help us understand what the gospel is all about. which is why Paul may have warned us very carefully in the book of Galatians.
I marvel that ye are so soon removed from him that called you into the grace of Christ unto another gospel, which is not another. But there be some that trouble you and would pervert the gospel of Christ. But though we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel unto you than that which we have preached unto you, let him be accursed.
Was that simply hyperbole on the part of the Apostle Paul? Was his warning about angels and women in the book of 1 Corinthians or angels in the book of Colossians, was that simply a warning? More to the point, in the book of Revelation and the churches, were the angels simply messengers, if we have been told, or were they, and will they be in the future terrestrial, extraterrestrial beings that come to us clothed in the modern lore of the UFO? Was that warning from Paul real? Mack goes on in his article to say, it is one thing to acknowledge that spirit resides in the universe and we are not alone. It is quite another for spirit to show up. An odd and threatening form, created partially in our own image. At best, this would seem puzzling and difficult to integrate. At worst, to the polarizing perception of Christian dualism, these dark-eyed, misty beings from the cosmos would seem to be playmates of the devil. Traditions from Buddhism to Christianity, from Catholicism to Tibetanism would be at odds, would be confused, would be shattered to their core. That is, all of those that don't have God's Word as their guiding light. All of these religions have always recognized a vast range of spirit entities in the cosmos. They would seem to have a little less difficulty in accepting it, especially if the spirit was now wrapped in the material. The UFO abduction phenomenon does such amazing things in unifying once you put all the pieces together. Again, we are not talking about seeing something that is UFO per se. We're not talking about little green men. We are talking about an encounter of the fourth kind and even higher, a paranormal encounter, a paranormal spiritual encounter in which men like Mack come so very close to stating, and yet their humanistic anti-God philosophy will not allow them to simply accept what the Apostle Paul stated 2,000 years ago in Ephesians chapter number 6. It's interesting to note that Dr. Mack actually worked with Bud Hopkins, another heavy hitter in the world of the other side. He states that although there is not empirical evidence of the beings themselves, there are common denominators of evidence that is common to those who make the claims and the experiences of the traumatic abduction. When you come to abduction cases, there are a number of symptoms, signs, and memories found in cases. There was a specific study that was done where abduction investigators, including 6 physicians and mental health professionals, were consulted in preparing a report. This report suggested that an abduction incident or case was simply off the grid of the ability for man to understand in the humanistic terms, in the materialistic terms. Abductees do tell of having seen little men or other beings, or of feeling a presence in their room as a child. They have often felt they were different or have led a double life. They may have had close-up sightings or strange craft or objects in the sky during the day or even at night, or even have had unexplained intense or bizarre bright lights in their bedrooms. In association with a UFO sighting, and at times independent of it, abductees report of unexplained time lapses of an hour or 2 or more, and have found themselves dislocated to places, yards, and some cases even miles from home, with no explanation of how they got there. They may recall awakening during the night and feeling a dread, a numbness, or paralyzed with a sense of a physical presence, or even seeing small beings with large black eyes in their rooms. Other symptoms include a strong sense of vulnerability, generalized anxiety, fear of hospitals, flying, elevators, animals, insects, and sexual contact. Sounds, Smells, images, or even activities that are disturbing for no apparent reason may later prove to be associated with a latent and hidden psychological abduction experience. Insomnia, fear of the dark and of being alone at night, covering windows against the peeping eyes of intruders, sleeping with the light on even as an adult, disturbing dreams and nightmares, all associated with a flying craft or an alien ship taking the person away. These are all common of abductees. Rashes, marks, cuts, or scars may appear overnight, or unexplained bleeding from the nose or the ear, which by itself might not draw attention, but attains significance in association with all the combined phenomena. Other symptoms include unexplained pregnancy. Now, whether Mac realizes it or not, he is leading us right into Genesis 3:15 and the serpent seed. One of the most phenomenal and shocking instances of abduction and UFO experiences is the unexplained and claimed pregnancies, whereby the women are inseminated. They fertilize and bring to birth a hybrid, and then that hybrid is taken away. They believe that has happened to them. Some claim that it has happened multiple times. Genesis 3:15 tells us that there is in fact a serpent seed. And Genesis 6 with the sons of God and the daughters of men tell us that the angels that left their first estate and the angels that we see once again before the end of the church age are all profoundly consumed with the sexuality of women. Dr. Matt mentions much more, very much more, that should haunt us. There are physical manifestations, and these manifestations frighten even the strongest of abductees who do not want to believe that their experiences are real, and yet abductees may tell of the surprise of waking up upside down in their bed. Some have been pinned to the ceiling of their room. Others are thrown, jerked around the room as if an entity had control of them. Their clothes have been removed and taken off. Abductees describe their confusion and disbelief on coming to the realization that even while driving, they are many miles away from the location that they were just moments ago. Sometimes finding themselves closer to their destination with time loss, at other times completely off the intended path. Some abductees have even found themselves in other states weeks later with no memory of the time that has passed. Many abductees display scars that fall into one or two of the characteristic types: the straight line on the scalpel and the depression or the scoop. Each of these marks are very common. Human reproductive functioning and sexuality appear to be at the very core of the abduction phenomenon. Women and men report a range of sexual experiences related to the reproduction of humanity. And sexual activity, which is defined as gynecological probing, removal and re-implementation of ova, removal and disappearance of fetuses, forced taking of sperm, samples of incubation and embryos on spacecraft. Even human nursing of hybrid fetuses have been reported. Alien-human sexual interaction and bonding. All of these have been reported, not by wild-eyed and crazy people living in a trailer on the side of a mountain, but by lawyers and doctors, by pilots, by mothers, fathers, by children, by your neighbors, who would dare not have you know the secret that they hold in their heart. Are they crazy? Are they foolish? Are they looking for their 15 minutes of fame? Or is there something developing beneath the surface? As we said, a crescendo of the unimaginable. Whatever may be found to be its source. For abductees, their experience, Mack writes, is profound, lasting, and inescapable. Abductees may learn, with or without help, to live with what they have experienced. But they have suffered, and sometimes continue to suffer, from the disturbing or traumatic experiences. Psychologically, they feel different. Nightmares and other disturbing dreams are a regular part of the abductions. Other dimensions of the trauma must also be stressed. A distance often develops when abductees tell their parents or others what they have seen or experienced, because no one believes it. They are most frequently told that they have been dreaming, having nightmares, lying, or just too imaginative, making up things, or as one woman put it, they just kind of tried to humor me. But to them, the experiences are real and clearly distinct from the dreams. But it seems now that we are all waking up from the dream. From the Pentagon pictures and videos to all of the sightings that we are seeing, the long dream that has been cloaked over the eyes and mind of modern man, this post-industrial man now we are waking up from the dream. And now it might not be the one or the group that is being abducted, but it may indeed be the world. While there are many theories that abound, the reality is there is only one simple truth that explains what is taking place. What the pilots are seeing, what the Pentagon is releasing, and what your neighbor is experiencing in the horror of that night alone, all fits into the very simple facts of a dimensionally based theory. A theory that Bible believers call spiritual. Max says we may be discussing penetration of the other dimension. Well, I'm glad that he finally caught up with the soul trap, because we've been talking about the tearing of the veil for some time, and we did not hatch that ourselves. The Bible clearly teaches us that in the last days perilous times shall come, not just geopolitically, not just apostasy, but from the heavens. Any theory then faces virtually irreconcilable contradictions, unless the theory is dimensional, Max states. The abduction phenomenon is considered from all different standpoints, but ultimately it is extremely bizarre. It is extremely non-material. It is extremely and profoundly spiritual. Max states in another article that we cannot accompany or define what is going on by simply physical manifestations. On the other hand, a literal extraterrestrial hypothesis stretches our notion of the physical universe and its properties to and beyond conventionally accepted limits and reality. Faced with this dilemma, faced with this contradiction, some UFO researchers, as mentioned before, like Jacques Vallée, Carl Brunstein, and others, are speaking more and more of a parallel world, a parallel universe. In fact, Vallée stated, for example, I believe that the UFO phenomenon represents evidence for other dimensions beyond space and time. The UFOs may not come from ordinary space, but from a multiverse, which is all around us. Again, it is amazing to me that some of the most cutting-edge scientists of the quantum world are now beginning to see what you and I see with the Bible. One writer states, interestingly, the abductees themselves, who are often scientifically unsophisticated and largely unfamiliar with such writings, speak, including under hypnosis, that they feel and have a sense of the penetration into their own consciousness of the other dimension, beyond our familiar, beyond our space-time reality. Max states that many of the abductees that he has met with have a sense of intelligence beyond our own, which they feel is responsible for trying to breed a new combined life form, changing their own consciousness and affecting basic human notions of reality. Ladies and gentlemen, that paragraph describes the book of Revelation. When we witness their coming, it is like a piece of fabric in a theater to create the illusion of a solid wall or backdrop, one writer states, or it is a movie screen. When they arrive, you are looking at ordinary reality as a movie screen in the optic nerve. When they come in, it is like someone shines a bright light, like an angel of light, behind the movie screen and obliterates the scene. What we perceive as the movie screen, what we call reality, they burn through, proving it's only a construct, a version of reality. So we are indeed Are we not returning to the days of Noah? For some time, the restraint has held in check the penetration, as the writer stated, from the other side, but no more. That checking seems to be waning, and that darkness seems to be gathering, and the crescendo of the unimaginable seems to be gathering. There is something out there in the skies, something that creeps into our rooms and dreams, into our worlds, and even into our beds, prodding, lurking, its spindly hands and tentacled arms lacing themselves around the minds of a blinded people. It is only we who walk in the light of the Bible that know the truth. The rest, well, the rest are observed, tormented, cataloged as flesh for a world of principalities seeking to be enfleshed. Beings and monsters from just out of particle range and human perception. Dr. Mack, Keel, Vallée, others go a long way to state what the Bible already beat them to. Simply put, we are not alone.
I've been sent here to determine who or what you represent.
I represent a group of civilizations.
What were you before you were human?
It would only frighten you.
Why have you come to our planet?
Your planet?
Yes, this is our planet.
No, it is not.